Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Kiana Canada show. I really want to apologize about the quality of the video in the other room that I was doing. Um, I, of course, I was in a different room. The lighting was different at a different computer. So, um, to reiterate, the quality was not that good. Okay, let's see. Hopefully, the microphone is, you know, working well. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get into today's topic, which is going to be about Trump's new executive order, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and your shares, what it does is it pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that videos like this are important. But we need to remember that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, that does not mean that videos like this are not important. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump recently published an executive order. So it is on the whitehouse.gov website. And this is continuing with the series, The Trumpian Marker. And so we are going to be going over that executive order together. So, as with this series, one thing that I do is I just kind of scan the executive order, but then we read it together and we make sense of it together. And so that's what I'm going to do here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give some commentary on the executive order as well. So I'm going to make an attempt to share my screen. Hopefully, um, I can do that. And I need to make sure that our volume is fine. Is volume okay? So I think that we're good. And let's see, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so here we are. This is published. It was published today, or it was published on the 28th, but I'm not seeing it in the Federal Register, but news outlets are talking about this story. So there are news outlets that are mentioning this story, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you why this executive order. Let's go through it. And I'm just going to give you my honest comment on what I feel about it, and then we'll go from there. So it says, Section 1, Purpose and Policies. Safe communities rely on the backbone and heroism of a tough and well-equipped police force. The Trump administration is claiming to steadfastly be committed to empowering state and local law enforcement to firmly police dangerous criminal behavior and to protect innocent citizens. When local leaders demonize law enforcement and impose legal and political handcuffs that may aggressively enforce the law impossible, that makes aggressively enforcing the law impossible, crime thrives and innocent civilians and small business owners suffer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's unpack that sentence. What Trump is doing here, ladies and gentlemen, is that Trump is moving against leaders, especially what I believe to be civil rights leaders, who are speaking out against police violence and police brutality. There are also a number of incidents that are taking place in the United States when it comes to immigration and, of course, the protest on campuses in the United States. And I also believe that this executive order is moving against those officials as well. Now, it says in this executive order that he believes that it places legal and political handcuffs that make aggressively enforcing the law impossible, and that crime thrives and innocent civilians and innocent citizens and small businesses owners suffer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I disagree with that because if we look to other countries such as um, like Finland and uh, like Canada, and there's a number of countries within Europe where law enforcement officers don't carry a firearm. The crime rates there are lower than the crime rates in the United States. And you may say, well, Kiana, well, the United States is a larger country and these countries are smaller. But if we take one of the largest countries in the United States, one of the largest states within the United States, and we compare that state to one of the states in the European Union, where police officers do not carry handguns, I can assure you that the crime rates are lower in jurisdictions where police officers don't carry handguns. Now, he goes on to say in this executive order that his administration will establish best practices at the state level as well as the local level for cities to unleash high pack local police forces, and he alleges to protect and defend law enforcement. Well, he's not alleging, he's telling us, right? That he's going to protect and defend law enforcement officers wrongfully. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the most frightening part. Law enforcement officers wrongly accused and abused by state or local officials in a surge of resources to officers in need. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there has been a number of elected officials that have been talking about the illegal practices that are taking place. And we just recently seen, ladies and gentlemen, in the United States where a judge was arrested because the I think it was ICE who was it was either ICE or the FBI, but they were of the opinion that the judge let an immigrant out through the back door, the jury door. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's deeply disturbing. Like, what did I tell you? That the United States is becoming an authoritarian, totalitarian regime. It's playing out right before our eyes, ladies and gentlemen. They're rolling back civil rights protections in the United States for people of color, specifically Black Americans, and they are giving more protections to institutions that would abuse their power to harm Black Americans. Let's continue. So he further states that his administration will work to ensure that law enforcement across the United States focus on ending crime, not pursuing harmful, illegal race and sex based equity policies. So, ladies and gentlemen, do you know what this is saying? Do you know what this is saying, ladies and gentlemen? What this is saying is that if there is a policy where, sorry, excuse me, if there is a policy, or excuse me, if there is an incident, let's say, for instance, a hate crime incident, well, law enforcement officers are not going to investigate those incidents. If there is, that's my interpretation. Now, I could be wrong, but from the verbiage of, or rather the language of this executive order, it appears as if like hate crimes are not going to be given priority in the United States, and that's deeply disturbing and frightening. Let's move forward. The result will be a law-abiding society in which tenacious law enforcement officers protect the innocent. Violations of the law are not tolerated, and American communities are safely enjoyed by all citizens. Again, ladies and gentlemen, that's just propaganda. That's just propaganda. Law enforcement officers already have strong protections in the United States. It's so difficult for Americans to bring claims against law enforcement officers. And now the Trump administration is giving law enforcement officers more protections. That means that there's going to be more political violence against marginalized communities. There is going to be more state crime. It is deeply frightening. Let's continue. He says that the Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to create a mechanism to provide legal resources and indemnification to law enforcement officers who unjustly incur expenses and liabilities for actions taken during the performance of their official duties. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know what that means? Is that if you bring a civil suit against a law enforcement officer, what is going to happen is that the state is going to the state at the federal level. What this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that the state at the federal level is going to pay for law enforcement officers' legal defense. This is exactly what that means. Let me read it again. The Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to create a mechanism to provide legal resources and indemnification to law enforcement officers who unjustly incur expenses and liabilities for actions taken during the performance of their official duties to enforce the law. Ladies and gentlemen, what this means is that if we see a video and a law enforcement officer is alleging that they're enforcing the law and they pull a citizen out of their vehicle and that citizen and they're tasing that citizen and that is unlawful and they have the wrong person and the citizen takes them to court or the citizen actually files a legal action against them, what the Trump administration is going to do, or what the United States of America is going to do, is pay the legal defense of that officer. Ladies and gentlemen, Americans, it's difficult for poor and marginalized Americans to get their legal defense paid for. And realistically, that is who this allocation of funds should be and that's what the Trump administration should be allocating its funds towards, is citizens who are being victimized by law enforcement officers. This mechanism shall include the use of private sector pro bono assistance for such law enforcement officers. Ladies and gentlemen, do you see what the United States is, what's happening? Let's read section 3. Empowering the state and local law enforcement, the Attorney General and other appropriate heads of executive departments and agencies shall take all appropriate action to maximize the use of federal resources to: 1, provide new best practices to state and local law enforcement to aggressively police communities against all crimes. Did you read? Let's read that again. To provide new best practices to state and local law enforcement offers to aggressively police. If there isn't already aggressive policing in the United States, I don't know what is. Expand access and improve the quality of training available to state and local law enforcement. Increase pay and benefits for law enforcement officers. Are you kidding me? Strengthen and expand legal protections for law enforcement officers. Again, ladies and gentlemen, it's very difficult in the United States to bring a legal claim against a law enforcement officer. Ask people who have done it. It's an uphill battle. And the only claims that are efficacious and successful are really the claims that are publicized in the media, where there is a documentation, like a video, where multiple people in an airport or on the street or in a convenience store or in a department store or are recording the incident, and that is going viral. Promote investment in the security and capacity of prisons. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States is already a police state, and we already have mass incarceration within the United States. The fact that the Trump administration wants to invest in more prisons, that is deeply disturbing. That is extremely disturbing to me. Let's continue. Increase the investment in and collection, distribution, and uniformity of crime data across jurisdictions. Within 60 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General shall review all ongoing federal consent decrees, out-of-court agreements, and post-judgment orders to which a state or local law enforcement agency is a party, and modify, rescind, or remove to conclude such measures that unduly impede the performance of law enforcement functions. Let's I'm going to share what I want to do now is I want to go to a video, ladies and gentlemen, um, that is posted by CBS News. Oh my God. What is this world coming to? It's frightening. I need to make sure that we're good with let's see. I think we're good. Okay, so let me play this.
And a record 142 executive orders in his first 100 days in office. Yesterday, tucked in at the bottom of the third section on an order about strengthening law enforcement, is a directive to review and potentially terminate what is known as consent decrees. Our Scott McFarland joins us now to explain this. Scott, remind us again what a consent decree is.
Yeah, so often, John, consent decrees are issued against police departments under review by the feds for possible misconduct or bad policies or racial discrimination. There have been any number of them in the past few years. The Trump administration is shifting its civil rights division away from overseeing police departments. That is a seismic shift for an office.
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? The Trump administration is shifting the federal government away from investigating the civil rights, so shifting the civil rights division away from investigating police misconduct in police departments, which they were very bad at doing in the first place. But now there is really not going to be any investigation there. Isn't this deeply disturbing, ladies and gentlemen, where the government, who is claiming to be the leader of the free world, where there's not any like accountability for law enforcement officers, it's frightening. It's so frightening. Let's continue.
That was opened during the civil rights movement, during the mid-20th century. Instead, the new mission statement of the Civil Rights Office of the Department of Justice, as reviewed by CBS News, includes language that it's going to focus on transgender athletes, on university protests. Just a different world, John, from what it's done traditionally, which is combat housing discrimination, racial discrimination, and police misconduct through consent decrees.
Also, we've had cuts at the Department of Justice.
Misconduct through consent and police racial discrimination, housing discrimination. Different world, John. University language that it's going to focus on transgender athletes, on university protests. Just a different world, John, from what.
So did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? What now the Trump administration is doing is going after transgender people. For some reason, now transgender people are on the Trump administration's hit list, and the Trump administration is going after trans people. And not only are they going after trans people, but they're going after people who protest on universities, people who are exercising their right to freedom of expression under the First Amendment. Now, I believe that where all the people that are on the right who are always talking about freedom of speech, who are talking about they're constitutionalist, they're talking about protect the Constitution. Where are all those people? We're not hearing them come out and speak. Let's continue. Oh my God.
Tell us what the effect has been on that department.
It impacts communities nationwide. CBS News has learned more than 360 federal grants have been frozen that help groups that help crime victims, from human trafficking victims, sex abuse victims, elder victims, rural crime victims. They've been halted because the department says they know.
Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? They're freezing funding that is helping those people who have been part of an SA, elderly victims, SA victims, trafficking victims. They're halting funding for vulnerable people. I'm deeply disturbed by this, ladies and gentlemen. Like, this is really concerning. Let's continue.
No longer effectuate the priorities of the agency, which wants to put funding towards more direct programs to impact and help support victims. One of the groups that was targeted for a funding cut is the National Center for Victims of Crime, which runs a national crime victims hotline. Take a listen to the operator of that organization, Renee Williams. You think this sends a message to crime victims too?
I think it does send a message to crime victims. The administration and Mr. Trump's campaign promises were that he was going to put crime victims first. And I believe that if these cuts are allowed to stay, that proves that that promise was not necessarily true.
Are you owed thousands in car finance compensation? Find out now in 60 seconds. If you took out a car finance agreement anytime since 2007, you could be
going to put send a message to crime victims. The administration and Mr. Trump's campaign promises were that he was going to put crime victims first. And I believe that if these cuts are allowed to stay, that proves that that promise was not necessarily true.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so do you see like how deeply disturbing the executive order is and the impact that it's going to have on everyday Americans. There is so much going on in the United States right now, ladies and gentlemen. Like, isn't it difficult to wrap your head around it? Like, we're currently, w- let's continue with the executive order. So it goes on to say that within 90 days of the date of this executive order, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security and the heads of agencies as appropriate, shall increase the provision of excess military and national security assets in local jurisdictions to assist state and local law enforcement. Within 90 days of the date of this executive order, the Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Attorney General, shall determine how the military and the national security assets, training, non lethal capabilities, and personnel can most effectively be utilized to prevent crime. And then it goes on to say that the Attorney General shall pursue all necessary legal remedies and enforcement measures to ensure the rights of Americans impacted by crime and shall prioritize prosecution of any applicable violations of federal criminal law with respect to state and local jurisdictions whose officials, one, willfully and unlawfully direct the obstruction of criminal law, including by directing and unlawfully prohibiting law enforcement officers from carrying out their duties necessary for public safety and law enforcement. B, unlawfully engage in discrimination or civil rights violations under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that restrict law enforcement activity or endanger citizens. Let's stop there and then we'll continue. Basically, what he's doing is this diversity, equity, inclusion, this DEI. What they're really talking about is Black people. That's who they're really talking about. And let's go back to what it means to have affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion, which Black Americans in the United States really don't benefit too much from. Well, the reason why there was affirmative action in place is because in the United States, when a Black American who was qualified sought uh, to attend a university and enroll in a university, they were denied admission based on their race. We even have just a moment. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to find. So I found the photo. Let's see. Trying to find a better photo. Let's see. This may have to do, but just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, let's see. I think. Okay, so this is what it was like, where there was. Hold on. I'm just trying to make sure that the photo is a legitimate depiction of what was happening in history. Uh, okay, here we go. I think I have just a better photo. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what happened: is that there was a student at a university, and his name is George McLaurin. And as you can see from this photo, there was segregation, right? And so, what happened, ladies and gentlemen, is that Blacks were segregated even in schools. Not only were Blacks segregated in schools, but sometimes when Blacks sought to enroll in university, what happened? During the Jim Crow period, they're they weren't allowed to enroll in the university. And then two, ladies and gentlemen, when Blacks sought to enter a store, they couldn't enter the store because of their skin color, or they couldn't ride at the front of the bus because of their skin color. They were told that they had to ride at the back of the bus, or they couldn't drink from a water fountain because of their skin color. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is the reason why affirmative action was actually put into place, is so that when African Americans who were qualified sought to enter university, that they could enter the university without being discriminated against by the dominant society. So when when the Trump administration is saying that uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which Black people don't benefit anyway from, is under the cloak of, what was his words exactly? That there is unlawfully engaging in discrimination or civil rights violation under the guise of diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, I blame our leaders for fumbling the ball on this and dropping the ball on this. And they still haven't got it together. This is really not about any other issue. This is really going after Black people. What they're doing is they need to eviscerate all of the other protections in place so that they can attack Black people. That is what the Trump administration is trying to do. I'm not fear mongering. I'm not inciting violence. Don't attack Trump administration for this. I'm not doing anything like that. This is what I believe is happening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue with the executive order. The Attorney General, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall utilize the Home Security Task Force formed in accordance with Executive Order 14159 of January 2025 to coordinate and advance the objectives of this order. And it goes on to say that nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency or the head thereof, or the functions of the director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. This order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to availability of appropriations. This order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any part against the United States in departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. The Department of Justice shall provide funding for this order publication to the Federal Register. Ladies and gentlemen, I just don't think we need further protections for law enforcement officers in the United States of America. They already have enough protections. And there is a large body of evidence that specifically states that police officers in the United States are committing a lot of crimes. There is a author who wrote a book. The book is called Propaganda. His name. So it's a book by Alec Caracattensis. Difficult name to pronounce. Caracattensis or Caracattensis. And basically, he wrote a book about propaganda. So the book says how police and the media manipulate our news. And perhaps what I'll do is maybe I'll read this book, but I'm deeply disturbed and concerned about this new executive order, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to be, let me see if, I doubt my university has it. No, there's just a review of the book. I wonder let's see if there is, it's not a table of contents, but so what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Like, do you think that the United States is moving toward is becoming a totalitarian regime? Remember, there were videos and I'll link those videos in the description where I describe what totalitarian is. and why I believe the United States is moving toward totalitarianism. Let's look at it. All of the protections in the United States that have been given or that have been enacted and that have been created to protect minorities that are essentially created to protect Black Americans as well, all of those protections are being eviscerated. Now it's time. It's time for our leaders to stand up and to take a case to the United Nations. This is not going to stop. And when Trump does this, other countries follow in his footsteps. And all this is what this is seeking to do is to maintain its power. The United States is trying to stay in power at the top. So it's doing that by becoming a totalitarian regime, by rolling back all the protections of marginalized citizens so marginalized people can't stand up and protect themselves legally, socially. It's frightening. And so tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think I'm correct about this executive order, that it is frightening? And what do you think the solution is if you feel like the United Nations is insufficient, that there is it doesn't have power, international law does not have power, then what is the solution? What is a peaceful solution? How, in your personal opinion, how do marginalized groups peacefully win back their rights? This is not only happening within the United States, ladies and gentlemen. This is happening in the Republic of Ireland. This is happening in Northern Ireland as well. In the Republic of Ireland, there are Black groups that are not speaking out anymore. And I told them that that was going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. So oftentimes groups think that if they feed you to the wolves, that they'll be protected. That if only they feed you to the wolves, that the wolves will be full and won't be hungry and won't go after them. But they're seeing that because right now, I'm not seeing any group within the Republic of Ireland, any Black group speaking out. And hardly anybody is speaking out here. And if they do, and if they're American, well, what happens is that this country contacts the intelligence agencies that are associated with the United States and the Republic of Ireland, and they come after you for speaking out against racism. Now, they're not coming after people who are legitimate threats to national security. They're coming after you if you are talking about racism. And we should be concerned about that because our intelligence agencies should be protecting us, and they should be focused on people who are seeking to harm our country and our countries. But they're not really focused on that. They're focused on they're allocating a lot of the resources that they have to silencing dissent. You better think this way. Don't you think different than us? Ladies and gentlemen, you know what this is? It's the allegory of the cave. Let's This is what this is, ladies and gentlemen. It's Plato's allegory of the cave. And I want you to let's watch this together.
What is reality? Knowledge, the meaning of life. Big topics you might tackle figuratively, explaining existence as a journey down a road or across an ocean, a climb, a war, a book, a thread, a game, a window of opportunity, or an all too short-lived flicker of flame. 2,400 years ago, one of history's most famous thinkers said life is like being chained up in a cave, forced to watch shadows flitting across a stone wall. Pretty cheery, right? That's actually what Plato suggested in his Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic, in which the Greek philosopher envisioned the ideal society by examining concepts like justice, truth, and beauty. In the allegory, a group of prisoners have been confined in a cavern since birth with no knowledge of the outside world. They are chained facing a wall, unable to turn their heads, while a fire behind them gives off a faint light. Occasionally, people pass by the fire carrying figures of animals and other objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners name and classify these illusions, believing they're perceiving actual entities. Suddenly, one prisoner is freed and brought outside for the first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he finds the new environment disorienting. When told that the things around him are real, while the shadows were mere reflections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appeared much clearer to him, but gradually his eyes adjust until he can look at reflections in the water, at objects directly, and finally at the sun, whose light is the ultimate source of everything he has seen. The prisoner returns to the cave to share his discovery, but he is no longer used to the darkness and has a hard time seeing the shadows on the wall. The other prisoners think the journey has made him stupid and blind and violently resist any attempts to free them. Plato introduces this passage as an analogy of what it's like to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. Most people are not just comfortable in their ignorance, but hostile to anyone who points it out. In fact, the real-life Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian government for disrupting the social order, and his student Plato spends much of the Republic disparaging Athenian democracy, while promoting rule by philosopher kings. With the cave parable, Plato may be arguing that the masses are too stubborn and ignorant to govern themselves. But the allegory has captured imaginations for 2,400 years because it can be read in far more ways. Importantly, the allegory is connected to the theory of forms developed in Plato's other dialogues, which holds that, like the shadows on the wall, things in the physical world are flawed reflections of ideal forms, such as roundness or beauty. In this way, the cave leads to many fundamental questions, including the origin of knowledge, the problem of representation, and the nature of reality itself. For theologians, the ideal forms exist in the mind of a creator. For philosophers of language viewing the forms as linguistic concepts, the theory illustrates the problem of grouping concrete things under abstract terms. And others still wonder whether we can really know that the things outside the cave are any more real than the shadows. As we go about our lives, can we be confident in what we think we know? Perhaps one day a glimmer of light may punch a hole in your most basic assumptions. Will you break free to struggle towards the light, even if it costs you your friends and family? or stick with comfortable and familiar illusions? Truth or habit? Light or shadow? Hard choices, but if it's any consolation, you're not alone. There are lots of us down here.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The allegory of the cave, Plato's allegory of the cave. Now, this is what I think how we can use this to explain what's happening now, right? In Plato's The Allegory of the Cave, there are people that are chained inside the cave and they are seeing reflections on the wall. And those people that are in the cave think that those reflections are real. But one of the prisoners is released. And of course, he is exposed to sunlight and he actually sees real life, real things as they really are. So when he goes back to tell the cave members, or excuse me, the prisoners about what he has discovered, he is condemned. He is told that he is wrong. And that is because there was an awakening, right? And he discovered how things truly are. And he wasn't no longer chained to chained within this cave and chained to these concepts and these ideas that the masses had, right? And so there are beliefs and opinions and thought processes that everybody is sharing, especially in Plato's cave. Everyone has the same ideology and the same perception. And so when somebody who has been in the cave and has actually left the cave and they see the world for what it really is and they come back and say, "Hey, I think this is what's happening. I think this is what's going on." Then you have people that are condemning them and telling them to be quiet, to shut up. It's the world that, well, this is the world that we are living in, and it's becoming more frightening each day. And so what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Like, do you think who are you in Plato's The Allegory of the Cave? Are you the cave member that is watching the shadows on the wall, or are you the person who has been released from bondage and able to see things clearly? And if you're able to see things clearly as you've been released, let me know why. If you feel like it's better to uh, be blissfully ignorant and to stay within the cave and chained and to watch those shadows, tell me why that is important. And if you feel like that there is a different perspective to Plato's The Allegory of the Cave, I want to know that as well. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.